Hello beautiful creative friends, it's Belinda and I'm back today with another new project to share with you for the Confessions of a Paper Addict design team. Today I'm using a cut file from the archives. This cut file is called Star O Star, and I thought it would be really perfect to use as a frame for this photo of my daughter. This was a couple of years ago now, and it was just celebrating the fact that she had finally got off her training wheels. So I cut the Star O Star cut file from some glitter cardstock, and I used my Silhouette Studio. I dragged the photo into Silhouette Studio when I was working with the cut file. Once I had the cut file to a size that I was happy with, I then manipulated the photo in the design space to get the right dimensions that I needed to print that photo out, so that once I went back into Lightroom and into Photoshop, I could print it out at the right size to make sure that I had it fit perfectly inside that star. So I was starting to adhere it down, and then I realized that I wanted to back all of those open stars with some patterned papers. And the collection that I'm using here is one from Shimelle. It's called Main Character Energy. This is one that I bought specifically to use for layouts for my daughter. I love all of the purples that feature in it. Her name is Violet, if you're not already aware. So obviously purple is something that I feel really drawn to when I am creating layouts for her. But also there was just all of these really beautiful bright colors, and the sentiments in this collection are really positive and really uplifting, and I think really appropriate for a girl of her age and the messages that I want to share with her when I am creating pages. So I want to make an 8.5 by 11 page. I'm really loving the 8.5 by 11 size at the moment. I grabbed this pattern paper, which, as you can see, it was color blocked with lots of really bold, bright colors. But I am not a big fan of green, and I didn't like having that giant block of green smack bang in the middle. And if I trimmed it down to 11 inches tall, that green would really just draw my eye straight to it, because it would have sat big and bold right in the middle of the page. So to get around that, this is a technique that I've played around with before, but I don't think I've filmed it. I'm going to sort of create my own background. So I've cut those color blocks down into 1-inch strips. I know that on the top and on the bottom, I need a 1-inch strip that is 8.5 inches wide, because you're going to see that the whole length of it, the whole width of it on the page. But for the rest of these, I can actually trim them down. I only really need about 1.5 inches of each of those strips to be able to create my border. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm just trying to figure out the placement, what order I'm going to put the colors in, and whether or not, how many strips I'm going to have, and whether or not I'm going to overlap them. So I knew straight away I was going to have to trim them down, but I didn't need to trim down all of those strips. So some of them I'm going to save. So I've just trimmed them down into 3 pieces. So I think I've got 2 3-inch pieces and 1 2.5-inch piece of each color. And then to save you the excess time of watch me fussing around with it, I did switch the camera off, because you got the basic idea of what I'm doing here. I did switch the camera off and then work out my placement and adhere it all down off camera. So you can see there's a little bit of overlap. I eyeballed it, I didn't measure it, but I've got that same sort of color blocking striped effect. It's just I've repeated those colors more often, and I have separated that green into 2 smaller chunks, and it is far more subtle on the background now than it would have been in its original form. Now all I have to do is trim down my white cardstock. I've trimmed that down to 8 inches by 10.5 inches, so I've got about 1/4 of an inch on each side, and then I'm going to take it over to my sewing machine and add a row of stitching around the edge. I've chosen a soft purple. I shouldn't lie, I didn't choose the soft purple. That purple was already threaded in my sewing machine and it worked really well for this layout, so I just left it. Now, behind the star, I wanted to add something because otherwise, when I put that star down onto the white cardstock background, it takes up a lot of space on the 8.5 by 11 page. But if I just put that star down as it was, the amount of white space in between each of the points just felt a bit too awkward. So I wanted to add something behind it, nothing that was really overpowering, something that was going to kind of complement things without detracting from the main feature, which is the photo. I went through my little stash of stencils and I found this layered stencil set. So it's sort of some wonky circles, which is what I'm starting with here. And I'm using a soft yellow from Pink Fresh Studio. That one is Lemon Whip. So I'm just, you're going to see, I've sped this up quite a bit, but I keep bringing that star back in just to see where I need to place these circles, and I'm using a brush just to brush those down lightly. So the first layer is just the plain wonky circles. Then the next layer that I'm coming in with, and I'm using a darker yellow from the same color family from Pink Fresh Studio. This one is Marigold, and this one has got some striped circles. So the same sort of wonky circle design, but rather than being solid, these ones have a striped pattern on them. So again, I'm bringing that star in and out, and then I'm just figuring out where I want to place each of these striped pieces, and I'm going over the top. And you can see there's a nice contrast between the softer yellow that I laid down first and this really darker yellow, which coordinates really well with the yellow that's in the collection. And I'm trying to make sure that there's a little bit of balance, that there's no big gaps as I'm going around, bringing that star back in just to make sure that I've got things where I wanted. And then I realized there was a little bit of a gap here, so I'm going to come back and add that one. And then the last layer that goes with this circle stencil is again that same wonky circle design, but this one's all polka dots. And I wanted to come in with a contrasting color here. So I've grabbed, this is a Nouveau Mousse. It's very, very old in my stash, and I use them so rarely. So when I opened it up, it was dry, like it was crumbly and it was dry. But I have learned that if you can spritz a little bit of water onto it, and this is what I'm showing you here. If you spritz a little bit of water on, just give it a couple of seconds to sit there, and then you can use, you need a nice firm palette, and you can just work that around and get that top layer. The water just softens it again, so it makes it back into that sort of buttery texture that you can use through a stencil rather than that crumbly thing, which before I learned about this, I probably would have just thrown the whole pot away. So now I don't have to. But as you can see, that's in that really beautiful, soft lilac-y purple. And if you're not familiar with these Nouveau embellishment mousses, it's got quite a bit of shimmer to it. So you're probably not going to be seeing it on camera here. You may see it in some of the close-up photos at the end, but certainly in real life you can see the shimmer. And I'm doing the same thing here that I did with the first two layers of the stencil. Obviously I've got a little bit more of a guide now because I have got most of the space filled in with those two yellow layers. So I'm just trying to make sure here that I am spacing the little purple dots as evenly as I possibly can around. It is kind of a rough circle shape that's going to now be sitting behind the star. But then also making sure that you're going to be seeing enough of it sitting behind the star, but not too much. I'm also trying to make sure that the margins on the left and right hand sides are fairly similar. So you can see on one side, I've got that solid yellow comes out fairly close. It's about 1/2 inch from the border. So I just made sure that I made one of those purple dots sit about the same distance from the border on the other side. So looking for balance in spacing and also balance between the margins. So popped that aside. That's all dry now. Now I'm ready to come and start putting everything together onto this page. I want to bring this star frame up off the back of my page a little bit to give it a bit of depth, but not too much depth because I really am trying hard to keep my layouts as flat as possible. So this is a piece of chipboard. It would have come in some packaging for something that I've purchased at some point. Whenever I get these, I've got a little envelope that sits off to the side of where I craft, of where I scrapbook, and I just put everything in there and chop off pieces as I need them. So it is perfect for adding just enough depth to give that little bit of a shadow behind the element without adding too much bulk to the page. And as you can see, this kind of thing is just not something that my brain is good at doing. I can't visualize the placement of things, so it took me a little while to turn those little triangles around and get them to fit properly on each of the points of the stars. But that's done now. I'm just using some tape runner to stick everything down. At this point in the process, I wasn't 100% certain that I wasn't going to want to tuck some more pieces underneath. And I have learned my lesson the very, very hard way, that it is far easier for me to lift things up off the page that have been adhered down using tape runner than it is if I am using glue. I say I've learned that lesson, but then a little later on, you're going to see me do the same thing again, glue something down that I later decide to pull back up again, but that's later. The title for this page is To Wheelin, because that's the story. Her training wheels finally came off. I have used an alphabet die from my stash, and I used one of the 6x8 pattern papers that had just stripes, not evenly spaced, sort of wonky stripes of color. I've die cut the title from that patterned paper. Then I've also die cut it twice more from a thick white cardstock, just a scrap piece of that thick white cardstock that I had in my stash, and then I've layered them up together, and that gives it gives a bit of sturdiness because these are quite thin. Also gives it a little bit of dimension, so it's pretty much like making your own thickers, but you are completely in control of the pattern that shows, with how deep they go. And you're seeing me here with my little trick for laying things like this down nice and evenly. I use the grid on my mat to lay all of the letters down, making sure that they're nice and straight and evenly spaced. Then this time I have used a piece of the low tack tape from scrapbook.com, because I found that the washi tape that I was using was just sticking too much to the paper. So that low tack tape definitely worked a lot better. And then I can apply the wet adhesive, excuse the back of my head there, apply the wet adhesive to the back of each of those letters, and then that makes it so easy for me to lay it down onto the page, using my ruler to get it nice and straight, and then eyeballing it to make sure that it is in the middle, that it's centered. But that means that all of those letters are nice and straight, evenly spaced, and it's far quicker for me to do that than it is to place each one down individually. My journaling I have typed out on my typewriter and then cut it down into strips, and now I'm using my wet adhesive to lay each of these down. I usually use my T-square ruler just to make sure that that first one is straight, and then I eyeball the rest of them. I find that once I've got the first one down, the others are fairly easy to just follow suit. Now, I said earlier on that I wasn't entirely convinced whether I was going to tuck things underneath, but by this stage I had decided no, I wasn't going to tuck things underneath. What I did actually want to do though was just add some embellishments around the star, and I've decided to go with a, I can't recall what it is, color blocking. Choosing some embellishments that match the colors of the pattern papers behind each of those stars. And so then I've got a little purple on a purple and a teal on a teal. And I'm also trying to make sure that I'm using a few different types of embellishments. So I've got some puffy stickers, I've got some die cut pieces. I think I even used one of the thickers but pulled the backing off it. And then I've just got some plain cardstock stickers. So I'm placing those at a few different places around the star. You may see me come and do a little bit of counting in a minute. And the reason that I do that is that I know that in terms of design, visually when you are looking at something, having uneven numbers is visually more appealing than having even numbers. So when I count up my embellishments, I'm just counting to see how many of those stars I have actually placed embellishments on, because I want to make sure that I'm either embellishing 3 or 5 or 7 of the stars, not 4 or 6. or 8 of the stars, because it just works better. Visually, it's a little bit more balanced. So if you see me counting, that's what I'm doing. So I'm just going to keep it really, really simple. I do adhere a little strip of hearts down underneath my journaling, just in that little bit of white space there. But once I laid it down, it just didn't really gel with the rest of the layout. It didn't really work. So off camera, I do peel that back up again. There it is. Off camera, I do peel that back up again, and I actually go with some punched out stars, tiny little stars from the same glitter cardstock that I used for the star frame. And you are going to see me punching those stars out in just a moment, because I had fully intended on using them to sort of scatter as little sprinkly bits around the layout, but I decided that no, I was happy with how it was embellished. So like I said, just off camera, I'm going to use some of those stars down in that bottom piece there. But that is it for this super bright and fun layout. I do hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I'd love for you to go ahead and leave me a comment or give me a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and join me on my upcoming paper crafting adventures. But I will leave it there for now and say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.